I worked 2 jobs while my husband chose to be unemployed, he cried when I left. The first time I realized my marriage was dying, I was scrubbing dried ketchup off diner tables at 2:15 in the morning while my husband texted me asking if I could pick up ice cream on the way home. Not medicine, not groceries, ice cream. I remember staring at the message with aching feet and cracked hands while the old neon clock above the counter buzzed loudly in the empty restaurant. Long night, my manager, Denise, asked gently. I forced a smile. Something like that. She looked at me carefully but didn't push. People who work double shifts recognize exhaustion in each other. At 34 years old, I was surviving on coffee, 4 hours of sleep, and denial. During the day, I worked as a receptionist at a dental office in downtown Chicago. At night, I waited tables at a 24-hour diner near the freeway. 17 hours a day, 6 days a week, and somehow, we were still barely paying rent. Because my husband, Trevor, had decided working was bad for his mental health. At first, I tried to understand. 3 years earlier, Trevor lost his sales job during company layoffs. He was devastated, humiliated. I held him while he cried that night and promised we'd get through it together. And I meant it. Marriage was supposed to mean carrying each other when life got heavy. So I picked up extra shifts while he searched for work. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Eventually, job searching became video games. Video games became sleeping until noon. Sleeping until noon became endless excuses. The job market's terrible. Nobody appreciates experience anymore. I'm waiting for the right opportunity. Meanwhile, I was calculating whether we could afford both electricity and groceries in the same week. Still, I defended him. To my mother, to my coworkers, to myself, because admitting the truth felt unbearable. The truth was that my husband had stopped trying. And somewhere along the way, I stopped mattering too. By the time I got home that night, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Trevor was sprawled across the couch in sweatpants, controller in hand, television glowing across the dark apartment. "You forgot the ice cream," he said immediately. Not hello, not how was work, just disappointment. Something inside me flickered. "I worked a 14-hour day," I replied quietly. He shrugged without looking away from the screen. So, that tiny word hit harder than screaming ever could. I stared at him in silence. The man I married used to leave notes in my lunch bag. Used to kiss my forehead before work. Used to dream with me. Now he acted like my exhaustion was an inconvenience. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door before crying quietly into a towel so he wouldn't hear me. Not because I wanted to protect him. Because I was too tired to explain my pain anymore. The next morning, my alarm rang at 5:30 a.m. Trevor groaned dramatically beneath the blankets. "Can you make coffee before you leave?" I stared at the ceiling for several seconds. Then I got up and made his coffee. Because routine can become a prison before you even realize you're trapped inside it. At work, I accidentally called a patient by the wrong name for the 3rd time that week. "You okay, Emma?" my coworker Rachel asked. I nodded automatically, but Rachel didn't buy it. At lunch, she sat across from me in the break room and gently pushed half her sandwich onto my plate. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." "You've lost weight." "I'm just busy." Rachel sighed softly. "You know," she said carefully, "being married isn't supposed to feel like single motherhood." I laughed awkwardly, but the words stayed with me all day. That evening, while refilling coffee at the diner, an elderly man at booth 7 motioned for me. "You look sad," he said kindly. I smiled politely. "Just tired." "No," he replied softly. "Tired is physical. Sad sits behind the eyes." Something about the way he said it nearly unraveled me. Before leaving, he folded a $20 bill into my hand. "This isn't for the meal," he whispered. "It's because my wife worked herself sick for years while I failed to notice." I tried to refuse it. He shook his head firmly. "Don't wait as long as we did to have the hard conversation." That night, I sat in my car outside our apartment for nearly 40 minutes staring at the steering wheel. I didn't want to go inside. And that realization terrified me. Because home should be the place where your exhaustion feels safe, not heavier. When I finally entered the apartment, Trevor barely looked up from his phone. "You paid the internet bill, right?" he asked. I blinked slowly. That was it. No hug, no concern, no awareness that I looked like I might collapse. I walked into the bedroom quietly and stared at our wedding photo sitting on the dresser. We looked so young, so hopeful. Trevor's arm wrapped around my waist like he couldn't imagine letting go. I touched the frame gently. Then I whispered the question I'd been avoiding for years. When did you stop loving me? A few days later, something unexpected happened. I got promoted. The dental office manager called me into her office Friday afternoon and smiled warmly. We're opening a second location, she explained. And we want you supervising front operations. I nearly cried, not because of the title. Because it came with health insurance and a salary increase. For the first time in years, I felt hope. Real hope. I rushed home excited to tell Trevor. I imagined us celebrating together. Maybe ordering takeout. Maybe laughing again like we used to. But when I walked through the door, Trevor looked irritated. You're late. I got promoted, I said breathlessly. He paused. Oh, just oh. I waited for more. Nothing came. Aren't you happy? I asked carefully. Sure, he muttered. I just thought you'd make dinner. The silence afterward felt deafening. And suddenly, everything became painfully clear. I had spent years shrinking myself to protect a man who no longer saw me as human. Only useful. That night, I ate dinner alone at the kitchen counter while Trevor played online games loudly in the living room. At around midnight, I opened my laptop and checked our bank account. My stomach dropped. Several charges I didn't recognize filled the screen. Gaming purchases, sports bets, food delivery, nearly $800 gone in 2 weeks. I confronted Trevor immediately. You spent rent money. He rolled his eyes dramatically. I was going to replace it. With what job? His expression hardened instantly. You think you're better than me now? No, I whispered. I think I'm drowning. For a second, guilt flickered across his face. Then disappeared. You're always dramatic. That sentence changed everything. Because exhausted people can survive hardship. But they cannot survive being invisible forever. The next morning, I called my younger sister, Ava, for the first time in months. She answered immediately. Emma. Just hearing her voice made me emotional. Can I ask you something? Anything. I hesitated before speaking. If I needed a place to stay for a little while. She interrupted instantly. You already have one. I started crying so hard I couldn't speak. Ava stayed quiet while I pulled myself together. Then she asked softly, how bad is it? I looked toward the bedroom, where Trevor was still sleeping at 11 in the morning while I prepared for my second shift. And for the first time, I told someone the truth. 3 weeks later, I packed my things while Trevor was out with friends. Ironically, he suddenly had energy for socializing whenever someone else paid. I didn't take much, mostly clothes, books, a framed photo of my father, and the little ceramic bird my mother gave me before she passed away. I left behind the couch I bought, the television I paid for, the dishes I washed every night after 16-hour days. None of it felt worth carrying anymore. I wrote Trevor a letter and placed it on the kitchen counter. Not angry, not cruel, just honest. I told him I loved the man he used to be, but I could no longer destroy myself trying to save someone unwilling to stand. Then I walked out. The strange thing about leaving is that sometimes the world doesn't collapse afterward. Sometimes it gets quiet, peacefully quiet. For the first few days at Ava's apartment, I kept apologizing for everything. For using too much hot water. For taking up space. For existing while tired. Finally, Ava grabbed my shoulders one evening and looked directly into my eyes. You don't have to earn rest here. That sentence broke something open inside me. Because I realized I had been performing survival for so long that kindness felt uncomfortable. Ava lived in a small apartment with her 8-year-old son, Noah, who immediately attached himself to me. Every evening, he sat beside me doing homework while I answered emails from work. You work too much, he informed me seriously one night. I laughed softly. You sound like your mother. No, he replied thoughtfully. My mom smiles when she works. That hit harder than he intended. Because children notice truths adults ignore. Meanwhile, Trevor began calling nonstop. At first angry, then defensive, then desperate. You embarrassed me. You're overreacting. You can't just abandon your marriage. I ignored most of the messages. Until one voicemail changed everything. His voice sounded small, broken somehow. "Emma, I don't know how to do this without you." I sat in silence afterward, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to run back immediately. Not because I was happy. Because caretakers often confuse being needed with being loved. But then I looked around Ava's apartment. No tension. No walking on eggshells. No exhaustion hanging in the air like smoke. Just peace. And I realized peace should not feel unfamiliar. A month later, Trevor showed up unexpectedly outside the dental office. He looked awful. Unshaven. Wrinkled clothes. Red eyes. When he saw me, he immediately started crying. Not dramatic fake tears. Real tears. "I messed everything up," he whispered. "People passed us on the sidewalk pretending not to notice." I crossed my arms carefully. Trevor wiped his face with shaking hands. "I didn't realize how much you were doing." I said nothing. "The apartment's a disaster," he admitted weakly. "The power almost got shut off." For years, I had quietly handled every invisible responsibility. Bills, laundry, appointments, groceries, cleaning, emotional support, survival itself. And he never noticed because I never allowed things to fall apart. Trevor looked at me desperately. "I thought you'd always stay." There it was. Not love. Assumption. Tears filled his eyes again. "I was depressed, Emma." My anger softened slightly then. Because depression is real. Pain is real. Mental health matters. But so does accountability. "You could have asked for help," I said gently. "I know. You could have tried therapy. I know. You could have worked part-time. Contributed somehow. Anything." He lowered his head in shame. "I know." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Trevor whispered something that completely shattered me. "I got so used to you saving me, I forgot you were drowning too." The honesty in that sentence hurt more than all our arguments combined. Because for the first time in years, he truly saw me. But sometimes realization arrives after damage has already been done. Trevor eventually started attending therapy. Then support groups. Then job training classes. Not because I demanded it. Because losing me forced him to confront himself. Weeks later, he found part-time work at a warehouse. Then full-time employment. Ava was suspicious immediately. "You going back?" I honestly didn't know. Part of me still loved him. Love doesn't disappear neatly just because pain arrives. But another part of me had finally rediscovered herself outside exhaustion. One snowy evening, Trevor invited me to coffee. I almost refused, but curiosity won. When I arrived at the cafe, he stood nervously the moment he saw me. And for the first time in years, he looked awake, present. He had lost weight, started taking care of himself again. But more importantly, his eyes held humility instead of entitlement. "I've been volunteering weekends," he said after we sat down. I blinked. "Where?" "Food bank downtown." That surprised me. Trevor smiled faintly. "There's this older guy there named Marcus. Vietnam veteran. Lost his wife last year." He stirred his coffee slowly. "He told me something I can't stop thinking about." I waited quietly. "He said love isn't measured by how much someone carries for you. It's measured by how quickly you notice they're struggling to carry it alone." My chest tightened. Trevor looked at me with tears forming again. "I failed you." The cafe buzzed softly around us while snow fell outside the windows. "I can't undo that," he continued. "But I needed you to know, losing you woke me up." I believed him. And strangely, that mattered. Not because it erased the past, but because compassion had finally reached him before it was too late. When we left the cafe, Trevor handed me something small. A folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "A list," he said quietly. I opened it later that night. It contained every single thing I used to do silently while he ignored it. Pay bills, schedule appointments, wash uniforms, cook meals, work overtime, encourage him, clean bathrooms, remember birthdays, refill prescriptions, hold him during panic attacks. At the bottom, he had written, "I thought love was having someone who never leaves. Now I understand love is noticing when they're exhausted before they have to." I cried harder than I expected. Not because I suddenly wanted everything back, but because after years of feeling invisible, someone finally acknowledged the weight I carried. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, Trevor and I began rebuilding something. Not the old marriage, That version had broken beyond repair. But something more honest. We attended counseling, had difficult conversations, learned silence could wound as deeply as cruelty. And through it all, I kept working at the dental office, but only one job now. Sometimes I still caught myself panicking over small expenses out of habit. Sometimes Trevor still struggled with shame. Healing wasn't cinematic. It was awkward, messy, human. One evening, nearly a year after I left, Trevor and I volunteered together at the same food bank downtown. A tired woman came in near closing holding 2 children and apologizing repeatedly for needing help. I immediately recognized the look in her eyes. Exhaustion mixed with embarrassment. Trevor noticed it too. Without hesitation, he gently carried boxes to her car while speaking kindly to her children. And when the woman quietly apologized again, Trevor shook his head softly. "Everyone needs help sometimes," he told her. Simple words, but I saw tears fill her eyes instantly. On the drive home, snow drifted softly across the windshield. Trevor kept both hands on the steering wheel before speaking quietly. "You know what scares me most?" "What?" "That I almost became the reason you stopped believing people could change." I looked out the window silently, then reached over and took his hand. Not because everything was magically fixed, but because growth deserves to be witnessed too. Outside, the city lights glowed against the winter sky while strangers hurried home to warm apartments, tired families, second chances, and complicated love stories still learning how to heal.